following is a work of fiction and should not be taken as actual history.
Meet Professor Roger Hill, historian, adventurer, and raconteur extraordinaire. He travels to parallel worlds where history went differently and brings back lectures on his findings. So grab a prime seat, pay attention, and take good notes. This is Alternate History 100. Welcome to the class.
Good morning, and welcome to the new semester. So I'm coming back from my summer trip, and the first thing the customs officer says to me is, "Have you been on a farm?" Well, at least a couple of you liked it. And it does sound like a strange question, doesn't it? But there is a good reason for asking it. They want to know if I'm bringing back some kind of contagion, like swine flu, which comes from pigs but can make humans very sick. Or bird flu, which usually doesn't affect people, but can spread to domestic poultry. Remember back in the winter when the price of eggs went through the ceiling? That was because the government culled more than 30 million chickens in an effort to control an outbreak. And even if you didn't handle any livestock, you might bring back microbes in the dirt on your shoes, and that could lead to a botanical plague that could wipe out our crops here. I know what you're thinking. Botanical plague? That sounds like something from Star Trek. But it isn't. In 1845, there was a botanical plague that had an enormous impact on history. The Late Blight. Caused by a water mold that seems to have come from North America, it ravaged the potato crop in Europe, hitting Ireland particularly hard. But before I tell you why, let's talk about potatoes themselves. The first thing you need to know is that they are not native to Europe. They came from South America and only crossed the Atlantic after first contact with the Incas. They can produce a good-sized crop on a small piece of land, and they are rich in nutrients and calories. Sounds good so far, right? French fries are actually good for you. I really like the ones in our cafeteria. But let's get back to Ireland. At the time of the famine, Ireland was part of Britain and had been so since the Act of Union in 1800. They sent members to Parliament and everything. But they were not treated well or regarded as equals. Britain had this thing called the Corn Laws, which were a tariff designed to keep cheap foreign food out of the country. That benefited the wealthy landlords who owned the tenant farms in the British Isles, but it also kept food prices high for everyone. Because as we all know, tariffs suck. Thank you. Because Ireland was part of Britain, they were exempt from the Corn Laws. They had many tenant farmers working the land for absentee owners, and most of what they produced was exported, or rather sent internally within the United Kingdom, to England. Yeah. Try telling an Irishman that an Englishman's not a foreigner. Those Irish tenant farmers used a small portion of the land to grow potatoes for themselves. Potatoes became the staple of their diet. Half of the Irish ate little else. And then came the blight. When they harvested the crop in the fall of 1845, they found the potatoes black and shriveled. Most people would not eat them. Those who did fell ill, and many of them died. But what to do when there is nothing else to eat? And what to do when this goes on for 7 years? By the time the famine was over, more than 1 million Irish had starved to death, and 2 million more had emigrated. And this out of a population of 8.5 million in the 1841 census. That's a reduction of 35% in about a decade. But did this tragedy really have to happen? Now I have to tell you that I couldn't find a world where the blight didn't happen. The combination of overdependence on one crop and the weak customs inspections of the day pretty much made a catastrophe inevitable. Oh, Mr. Celsius must be smiling. But history is not just made by actions. It is also made by reactions. And that raises the question of what if the response to the famine had been better? Well, let's begin by looking at what happened in our world. After much internal squabbling, the government of Prime Minister Robert Peel finally got rid of the Corn Laws. This allowed the importation of American grain, but it wasn't done in sufficient quantity to make much of an impact. Soup kitchens were set up, but the program was not big enough to reach everyone. Public works programs were started, but the wages they paid were not sufficient to support a family. People continued to starve. And through all of this, the wealthy landowners continued to ship wheat and meat to England, even though the Irish had nothing to eat for themselves. Yikes. Remember Oskar Schindler? I could have done more. Well, in that world, the British government did do more. 1. Like here, they brought in food, primarily flour, since there was no refrigeration yet, from America. But they brought it in much greater quantities than they did in our world, and they set up a far better system for distributing it. This included the construction of railways. There were already some lines in Ireland, but the expansion provided jobs and income for the people, and the resulting network brought the imported food to more of the country. 2. Fisheries. The Ireland of the day certainly had fishing, but it was small in scale and there was nothing in place to distribute the catch beyond the local communities. Over there, they expanded not just the fishing itself, they also established processing plants where fish could be dried and pickled and thus preserved for shipment across the country. This continued after the famine was over and certainly helped the Irish economy. 3. They realized that shipping food out of Ireland during a famine was criminal and put a stop to the practice. Boy, did that make those wealthy landowners mad. Crops were bad in England during those years too, and food prices could have been jacked way, way up. But the absence of the Corn Laws allowed the importation of enough American food to feed the English without dooming the Irish. Because of all these measures, the impact of the potato famine on Ireland was greatly reduced in that world. Fewer people died and fewer people emigrated. The enmity that the Irish hold for the English is still there, but it's not as bad as in our world. And that's where I'm going to stop. The British could have done more about the famine. I want you to dig into the materials I brought back and write 2,000 words on the world where they did do more. Here are some suggestions. In North America, there are currently 44 million people of Irish ancestry. You may be one of them. Many of these come from people who crossed the Atlantic during the potato famine. Among those descendants, I found 2 presidents, Kennedy and Biden. In that world, those men were never born. That certainly made a difference. No doubt there are many other people in politics, science, sports, entertainment, of whom the same could be said. You could pick one and write your essay on what their absence meant over there. You could even pick yourself if you can show that you were descended from someone who fled the potato famine. Or you could look at a bigger picture. What was the impact of this massive Irish immigration on cities like Boston, New York, Chicago, Montreal? How are things different in a world where that influx did not happen? Or you could go to the other side of the Atlantic. How did the much smaller famine affect things over there? What were Anglo-Irish relations like in a world where the British actually helped the Irish to get through this catastrophe? What happened to the Irish language in a world where so many of its speakers did not die or leave the country? What was their Ireland like with the expanded railways and new fisheries? When did they achieve home rule? Sooner? Later? Never? Whatever you pick is due next time we meet. Maybe you can pick your topic over a nice plate of fries. And next time a customs officer asks a strange question about you being on a farm, remember this lecture. Class dismissed. Hi, I'm Gary Wheeler. Alternate History 100 is a labor of love with the twin goals of entertaining you and making you think. If you like what you heard today, please hit the subscribe button, give us a like, and tell your friends about us. Your word of mouth can really help this channel grow. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Until then, keep thinking and make some history of your own.
The preceding was a work of fiction and should not be taken as actual history.